The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome back to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick, your host from Firearm Mentor, and today I have Jennifer Ramirez on the line. And Jennifer and I actually spoke a couple weeks ago about her work with women who have been abused. And Jennifer volunteered very, very nicely to tell her story of abuse and inappropriate behavior growing up. She was the victim. And one of the things I do when I talk to people who have been victims of crime is I do not want to re-victimize them by having them relive what had happened. So I'm always very cautious about saying, hey, look, if you're not comfortable talking about this, then don't talk about it. For example, I recently had a guy in my class, a firearms class, who had just gotten shot. And he was wearing a vest. He carries a gun for a living. And I took him aside, and the idea was I wasn't supposed to talk to him about it, but I said, hey, look, if you're uncomfortable, you just need to let me know. So with that said, Jennifer, thank you for joining the show again.
Sure. Thank you for having me back again.
So you grew up being the victim of abuse, and I'd love just open-ended, please tell everyone your story.
I was sexually abused by my dad at the age of 7. I didn't tell anybody about it. I was scared of him, and he always had told me to keep it a secret. This is just like our thing, you know, and I just, even though I was young and very innocent, it's like I knew what he was doing because he used to do it at night and sneak around to do it. So I figured, I had a hunch that it was wrong, but I also didn't have words to put to what that was, you know, what was happening to me. I had no idea. I just figured it was wrong, and I knew I hated it. I knew I almost hated nighttime because I knew it was coming next. I told my older sister about the abuse because she had asked me about it, and I didn't even respond to her. It was just the look on my face that told her, you know, the answer. She asked me, has anyone ever touched you? And I just kind of had this shocked look on my face, and she just knew right away. And, you know, she called my dad out on it. He lied. He did this whole drama thing of he was having a heart attack, and, you know, it was a whole big show. And then, so my sister confided in her school counselor, who, you know, is a mandated reporter, so she had to report it to DCFS, to the cops. And so then the cops got involved, and that's probably around the time when the abuse stopped for me because my dad got scared. Then basically my father coerced all of us, including my mom, into he's like, I can't go to jail. If I go to jail, your mom's never going to make it. She's never going to be able to pay the mortgage on her own. You guys are going to be homeless. What are you guys going to do without me? And we all freaked out. We were all, you know, young. I was 7. So that freaked me out. And I think it freaked my older sister out. So then when it was time for her to go to court to talk about this, she basically lied on the stand and said that she made it all up because she had a lot of guilt around sending my dad to jail. So then he used that to his advantage to basically tell the entire family, see, I didn't do it. She made it up. She's a liar. She's a this, she's a that. So basically everybody turned against my sister. Nobody believed us. You know, everybody thought we were making it up. And that was basically our lives for a long time. And, you know, I grew up. I became a single mom at the age of 21. I also got into a lot of really abusive and toxic relationships. You know, I don't remember if I talked about it in the last call that we had, but, you know, I was broke, very, very broke. As soon as I told my kid's dad I was pregnant, he took off and left me high and dry. So I had to do everything by myself, like raising our daughter financially, physically, mentally, emotionally. And those are some really, really rough years of my life. And that's kind of when I started also getting into, you know, that was kind of one of my first abusive relationships was with my daughter's father. I went through a lot of financial abuse with him, and not so much physical, a little bit physical, but a lot of emotional, a lot of cheating and things like that. You know, I had really low self-esteem at that point, just the lowest. I was just at my lowest when my daughter was very small and I was broke, $25,000 in credit card debt, lived in a really bad neighborhood where there was drugs and shootings and gangbangers, really, really bad. And then that's kind of when I hit my rock bottom, when I was like, how the hell did my life turn into this mess, you know? Fast forward to I was 25, and I was in my last abusive relationship around that time. We broke up right around when I was 30 years old. And started going back to school at that point, and I kind of started changing my life around and started counseling around that time and realizing that I was in an abusive relationship. I had no idea what that entailed. I think I thought of abuse as what most people think of it as like a black eye, right? Or he's beating you up. But because that wasn't really happening, I didn't really know about emotional abuse and financial abuse and verbal abuse and just different things like that. So I just kind of thought all these things were normal because I grew up with a father who was very angry and used to say mean things and, just the sexual abuse and a lot of different things. So you start to just really think that those things are just what everybody does, that those are normal things, and they actually weren't. So counseling basically changed my life. It really helped me to work through a lot of my trauma. It helped me see things for kind of what they were. And I also was very self-destructive at one point, like self-sabotage like crazy. And so just really working through why I was doing that to myself and doing better. And so that's kind of a very fast overview of, I guess, childhood up until I started counseling.
How old were you when you started counseling?
I believe I was in my late 20s. I want to say I was 26 or 27.
Okay.
And it actually, the reason I started going was because I started going with my ex-abuser because, we were always fighting and having problems. So I thought, let's go to couples counseling. And then after we broke up, I stuck with that same counselor and I told her everything that happened. And she was like, yeah, that was an abusive relationship. And that's when I finally realized that I was in an abusive, I didn't even know, honestly, until she told me. And I was like, oh. And so that was a hard pill to swallow once I figured that out.
So, and I'm doing math here. It sounds like you had no treatment, no outlet for 20 years, approximately.
Yeah, most of my life, yeah.
How did you cope on a day-to-day basis with the knowledge that I can use words now as an adult, but these words might not have come to a 7-year-old? How did you cope with, during that 20 years, survival, emotional survival, physical survival?
I don't even know. You just kind of have to, right? We're always told to keep this a secret. This is the family business. Nobody needs to know about it. So I was basically told that's how you cope. You don't talk. You stay quiet. You sit pretty and you look pretty and you sit there. You don't say a word. And I just coped through church. My parents were very religious. So I think that was kind of one of my coping skills back then. Honestly, just kind of going day by day, honestly, just on survival mode all the time, now looking back at it too, I was in fight or flight a lot and not realizing what anxiety was and that type of stuff. But I think I had it my whole life, but just didn't really know about it till I became older. I was just in survival mode, I would say, more than coping. And then when I became in 21, I started coping with a lot of drinking, doing drugs and things like that. So that was my way of coping as an adult until I want to say once I hit 30, I wasn't drinking as much anymore. And now to this day, I really don't enjoy drinking anymore, going to bars and things like that. It's just not really for me anymore. But now I also know much healthier ways to cope with stress and things from the past.
I should have asked this earlier on, but how do you define abuse?
I would say abuse is basically all about power and control. So if somebody's manipulating you to get something that they want out of you, or it can also be withholding things like love, money, attention, things like that to get some type of power or some type of control over you. That is probably not the best definition, but that is what abuse is. It's all about power and control at the end of the day. And also, abuse is a choice. People choose to be abusive and people choose not to be. Like you and me, choose not to go punch strangers on the street.
Right.
And there's other people that do, so it is a choice. A lot of people think that drugs can be a reason for it, and alcohol. And yes, those can be factors into why people become more violent, but it is not the reason why people are abusive. That's just an excuse.
Very interesting. And can you share where your father is today?
He is actually in jail right now. He is awaiting trial, basically for the childhood sexual abuse.
Do you know what the statute of limitations are for that, or is there none?
There are no statutes of limitations in the state of Illinois. I'm not sure what other states have this, but I just know of Illinois right now because I obviously live here. So when it comes to sexual abuse in the state of Illinois, there are no statutes of limitations. So that was the reason that I was able to bring this up 30 years later and finally report him, because I finally felt that I wasn't scared of him anymore. It took me 30 years to not feel scared of this man. And that was a huge turning point in my healing journey. And so I decided to go, and I really thought the cops were kind of going to laugh at me and be like, 30 years ago, you're crazy, get out of here. But they were very, very nice. They were very supportive. I actually had a very good experience for the most part, working with the police on this. And that was something I never expected, honestly, especially because it happened so long ago. I really thought that they were going to turn me away, but they did not. So if anyone finds themselves in the same situation and you're in a state like Illinois, you have that option.
What was it, the Chicago Police Department or a suburban one?
So I live in the city, so I initially went to a CPD, a Chicago Police Department, but because my abuse happened in the suburb, they then had to transfer the case to the suburb that it happened in. So
Okay, cool. So how do you avoid, and the show is really about resiliency and overcoming adversity. That's what this episode is about. What will you do? What have you done? You're obviously either had to or have to go to court. How do you avoid re-traumatizing yourself when you're testifying or when you're doing depositions or other legal work?
For me personally, I'm obviously an open book about this. I talk about it all the time. So it to me is not so hard to talk about. However, not everybody is like me. Not everybody does this for a living and talks about their abuse daily like I do. And when I was working with the state's attorney, the way they were questioning me was actually very upsetting. And I even told the detective after, I'm like, are they trained in speaking with survivors? And he said no. Ooh. And I was like, why not? And he was like, I don't know. They don't have to go through training, but you can definitely see the difference between them and the detectives. The detectives were very trained, very well trained, very empathetic. And the state's attorney was just kind of like asking the questions straight out. And I kind of understand why they need straight out answers. But I was like, I could understand how this could be traumatizing to a person who is consistently telling their story over and over again, right? Like, why not just get everybody in the same room at once while they're telling their story? Why ask them to repeat their story 20 times to different people? And to answer that question, it's kind of hard to not be re-traumatized when you're being asked these questions. But that's why self-care is so important when you're going through something like this and taking care of yourself, and also allowing yourself to sit in the discomfort that's going on and just letting it be. And a lot of the times we're taught that pain isn't good, that pain is, and discomfort, and we've got to get rid of it. There's a pill for that. There's a pill for everything these days, but sometimes too, you just have to kind of let yourself sit with it for a little bit so that it can pass. Because if you keep just stuffing it down and pretending like it's not there, pretending like it's not so bad, it is, and it will come back in other ways. So there's not really, I guess, an easy way to answer that question because sometimes you have to talk about those things a lot, and especially if you're not used to speaking about them often and having to do it in a room full of strangers, it can be hard to not be re-traumatized.
So Jennifer operates an organization called And Rise. The website is women, plural, WOMEN, risechicago.org, where she actually helps female survivors of trauma and abuse. And I'm on the website, and I'm going to ask you some questions about the website, a little bit more in depth than what we discussed previously. Can you talk about struggling in silence and when it's time, and I think the time is always right away, when it's time for the person to actually speak out against their abuser?
A lot of people suffer in silence, as I like to call it, because there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt associated with trauma and abuse. A lot of the times people are victim blamed, like myself. I was told I made it up. I was told, a lot of things, especially recently. I was victim blamed by my cousins telling me, why did you feel the need to take vengeance into your own hands? Why couldn't you just let God handle it? I had another cousin tell me, well, as long as you're not lying, I got your back. And I'm like, why would I lie about something like this? Especially all these years later. So that happens to people a lot more often than not. They get victim blamed or told that they're lying. So a lot of people just don't even say anything to begin with, and fears of that happening in the first place. And then when it does happen, they don't want to tell anyone else because they're not being supported with something that was very traumatic to them. A lot of people do suffer in silence until they see somebody like me that's very open about it. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go out to Facebook and shout out their abuse, but they might be empowered to be like, oh, Jennifer was able to do it. And Jennifer was able to do it 30 years later. Maybe I have a chance. And it doesn't mean that they're going to go the next day after they hear my story. It might take them years. It took me 30 years to finally come out and say something. It took me a long time to finally feel, like I said, not scared anymore and very empowered to just speak my truth. And once I started learning that your truth is powerful, and there's a reason why people want you to be quiet. I always say too, that the only person that benefits from your silence is your abuser. They benefit completely from that. So that's why I always tell people, like, if you feel the need and if your heart says to go say something and to be honest about it, even if no one believes you, even if no one validates you, you know the truth, and nobody could ever take that truth away from you. They might try, but that doesn't mean that they know, because only you know at the end of the day, and your abuser knows. And just because your abuser doesn't admit it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, you know? And I think when I say that to people, it really helps them see it in a different way, because a lot of the times we kind of want to convince everyone that, like, this is, why would I lie? Or, you know, here's what happened. We feel this need to explain ourselves so that people don't think we're crazy or making it up or whatever, you know, but we do live in a society where victim blaming is very normal, unfortunately. And I always wondered why, and I took a training a while ago that the reason why people victim blame is because then they have to admit that messed up things happen and that there are messed up people in this world who do horrible things to other people like that. And they rather blame the victim and say, well, what did you do to deserve it? Instead of saying, like, well, why would an abuser do that? You know, why would he even do that to you? And that's happened to me a lot too. And I understand it's more traumatic, honestly. It is re-traumatizing for people to invalidate you like that. But like I mentioned, it's not our job to convince anybody of the truth is, because we know what it is, you know. And sorry, and then you asked another question at the end. What was that last question?
I don't remember, but I'm going to disagree with one use of your word. You said victim blaming is normal in today's society. I will say it's common, but definitely not normal. And that was just something that
Correct.
came off the cuff.
No,
I get it.
Correct. Very true. Yes, it is common, and it shouldn't be.
Right. One of the things that I teach, and there's a parallel here, but you got to hear the whole story, is I teach that sometimes people have a hidden disability. You can't see their disability. I have one. I'll share with everyone. 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and I had my thyroid taken out. And that's disabling because it has to do with temperature regulation and food intake and energy and all that. But nobody can see that. And there's a parallel there with abuse. And you say it right on your website. There's many types of trauma and abuse that people don't see. These are happening behind closed doors. The person might not have bruises. They might not have any affect. It's a hidden thing. So how do you empower people to pull the blanket back, to unhide what's going on?
Honestly, I don't tell people, like, oh, you have to tell me what's going on now. You know, like, I just share. And sometimes it's not me sharing, you know, sometimes we'll be in a support group and other women are sharing their story. And other people are talking about things that are either going on in their life now than some people, and they're like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. Or I've been through the same exact thing. And I think that's very empowering to just know you're not alone. Because like I said, a lot of people suffer in silence. And I know for my whole life, I thought, wow, I have a really messed up family. I can never tell anybody. I was so embarrassed. I never told anybody other than a couple of boyfriends throughout my life, like maybe 3 of them, about my sexual abuse. And I never told any of my friends until I was like in my early 30s. I had confided in a girl who was my best friend, and I could see how uncomfortable she was when I told her about it. She didn't even know what to say. And then that kind of like hurt my feelings, because I was kind of expecting to get more support. But now, doing the work that I do now, I understand how it's a very touchy topic and people don't know what to say, especially if they haven't been through it themselves. And that's just kind of the unfortunate part of it. But that's exactly why our support groups are so popular, because it helps to just be in a space where other people get it and they're not judging you and they're not telling you, are you sure? You know, are you sure that was rape, or whatever people say? You know, they just like, that happened to me too, and I believe you. And sometimes just hearing somebody say, I believe you, and not having to explain yourself is like extremely healing and validating. A lot of these people don't get validation from anyone their whole lives, just like me. So when you finally get it from people, it's life-changing, honestly.
So, Jennifer, you're really an inspiration to other people who have gone through, I'll call it the worst times of their lives, because this is just not a normal or an acceptable thing. And you're talking to people who were abused is just fantastic. And I'm reading your bio on the website, and I'm going to make a little joke here. You have a pit bull named Midnight.
I do.
I had a doggy named Midnight, too. He was all black.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, so I saw that.
It's all black, too.
It jumped off of the page. I would love for you to tell everyone about your book and where they can find it.
Well, the book is called Passion, Purpose, and the Pursuit of Dreams, and it's basically a collaborative author book. So I think there's 7 other authors in there, and I just basically talk a lot more in depth of my story of exactly what happened when I was a kid with my sexual abuse. And if anyone is interested in purchasing that, you can purchase it online through our website. If you go to our merch store, you can purchase it through the link on the website. It's a great book. It has other authors that have been through also not so great things, but how they've been able to kind of overcome and triumph in their life.
Awesome. Can you share, and if you can't, you just say you can't. Can you share a success story from one or multiple of the people that use womenrisechicago.org?
I can think of one right now at the top of my head. She was coming to our support groups for a couple of months, and then she got a job, so we haven't seen her as much anymore. But she started coming. She grew up in a domestic violence household, didn't even know that it was domestic violence until she said that she started going to her friends' houses when she was younger and started seeing how other families interacted. And then she realized, wait a minute, something's not right with my family. So she started coming to our support group. She started doing the counseling program. And because of that, she started talking to her family about, her working on herself and her, how the domestic violence really affected her in a negative way. And because of her starting with Ann Rise and being open about it and talking with her family about it, she actually got her family to do family therapy. And so now all of her family's in therapy together, and her parents are working through, their stuff, right, with domestic violence with each other. And I think that that's a huge success story, because not only did we affect her life in a positive way, but we affected her whole family's life. And I truly, that's part of the reason why I really believe in this work, because I think it's a trickle effect. And then guess what? This same woman, whenever she decides to have kids, she's going to break that cycle. So now her kids are going to have a much better life than what she did, and on and on. And that's I always commend people who are cycle breakers. It's not easy being the cycle breaker in your family. It is really hard, but I also told her I commend her.
On your website, there is a resources tab with a ton of available services that can help people who have been abused, including things like money management, addiction control. There's something called Operation Hope. There's financial, legal aid, all sorts of things. Can you talk about some of the resources that people may need as they work through and resolve their abusive issues?
Yeah, we have a ton of resources on our website. I network a lot, so I meet with a lot of different people that have different, nonprofits and just different services that can help the people that we work with. Like you mentioned, we have legal resources on there. So if anybody, needs free or cheap legal help, we have those resources there. We have food and pantries and housing for women, women's shelter. We have tons of different places that women can reach out to. We have different things on there for drug addiction and alcohol addiction. We're kind of partners with the Betty Ford organization. And just different things like that. I feel like anything that you need, we also have that 988 number on there. We have suicide prevention hotline, domestic violence hotline, sexual abuse hotline. We just have a lot of different organizations that can help with, honestly, a ton of different things. We even have stuff on there for paying your bills. If you live in the city of Chicago and you don't know how to sign up for, setting up your light bill or your gas bill, there's even numbers for people to help you work through that paperwork as well.
Awesome. And also there are an events tab where it talks about ongoing support groups One of them is a virtual. There are several are virtual, actually. Some are in person. And these are, I'm asking the question, even though I'm making a statement. These are all for women specifically, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, because I look at the chronic pain and illness and medical trauma, that doesn't necessarily lend itself just to women, but this group is just for women. Is that correct?
Yes, Sandrise just serves women right now.
Okay, all right. What's the lowest age that you would help service for children?
Right now we're only working with adult women. However, next year, 2024, I am planning to implement a new support group for teen girls from 13 to 19 because we have gotten a lot of inquiries for teen girls to come, and I don't ever turn anyone away. I always say if they want to come, they're more than welcome. However, I have a 17-year-old, and I know that she would be probably turned off by being in a room full of adult women just because there's, adult topics and not really teen-related topics. So that is something that we're going to try to implement next year. But we also offer, you can see under the How We Help tab, we are starting to offer these teen consent culture workshops through Chicago Public Schools. And it doesn't necessarily have to be CPS. So if you are listening to this and you're anywhere else in like Illinois and you'd like, your kid's school to have a consent culture workshop, you can reach out to us and we can try to make that work. Even if we're a little bit far away, we can always do it virtually as well. And that's just because I think it's really important to educate our young people on what consent looks like, what it doesn't look like, and making sure that teens respect each other's bodily autonomy and things like that. I think that's really important. And it starts with, education, because I know if I didn't know about sexual abuse when I was little, I didn't hear about it till I was much older, and I couldn't do anything. So if I would have known about it younger, maybe I would have spoke up sooner. Maybe I would have realized that this was really wrong and illegal, a lot of different things.
Right. And there are some also upcoming seminars that you're offering, like Savings for Goals and Unexpected Emergencies, Documenting Abuse, New Year, New You. This is all available on women, plural, risechicago.org/events. If you also want to make a donation, there is a Give Support tab, talks about ways you can help, what you can do, sponsor, volunteer, or even just get the word out. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.